I'm Lou Eisen, boxing writer, historian, and author. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite fights and one of my favorite people in the world. My brother at Matthew. I call him my brother. I love him. And Matthew Hilton. Matthew was the IBF junior middleweight champion of the world. He was the best junior middleweight in the world. And as he told me when he won the title, he started partying that night, never stopped. Had he taken better care of himself, he would have been beaten for the title. That night, he fought Buster Drayton at the Montreal Forum, and I was there. And the funny thing is, Matthew said to me one time, he said, "Lou, if everyone who was there, who said they were there, is actually there, there would have been about 400,000 or 500,000 people in the Montreal Forum." Matthew had already beaten named fighters. He almost decapitated Wilfredo Benitez and just destroyed him. He stopped Vito Antuofermo, which hadn't been done before. And so Matthew was a guy at 154 pounds who was built like a linebacker, but he was a guy that could, he hit like a heavyweight. When he hit you, you felt it. He'd hit you to the body and break your ribs. Anytime Matthew landed a punch, he broke something. And he was trained by his father, Mr. Hilton, I call him, Dave Hilton. And Dave Hilton trained two of his sons. Davey is also my friend who was the super middleweight world champion. And he trained Matthew. And Matthew was a great fighter. He's a great person. And this was a wonderful fight. It was an epic fight, and of course, we all thought, Matthew would win we hoped that Matthew would win by an early knockout. Buster Drayton is from Philadelphia. He was a long time sparring partner for Marvelous Marvin Hagler. And Drayton knew his way around the ring. He was a smart fighter. He just passed away recently. A real gentleman, and he knew how to survive in the ring. He knew how to roll with punches and slip punches, and he could take a good shot. And of course, he had to take a good shot being a sparring partner for Hagler. He was knocked out later on by the great Julian Jackson, who hit him with a tremendous left hook and right hand, and he fell backwards. He was out cold, but Jackson could punch. Jackson could really bang. So Matthew was training for this fight, and he told me he didn't sleep at all the night before. There was no sleep. He was just so excited and thinking about it, and he was training, and he was in great shape. And this was a 15-round fight. We don't see that anymore these days. Last night, John Ryder of Britain put on one of the bravest performances I've ever seen in my life, in going 12 rounds with Canelo Alvarez. And Ryder had his nose severely broken in the first round, so his nose and his mouth were gushing blood, but he wouldn't quit. And he landed a lot of good shots on Canelo. I thought Canelo won by a wide margin, but I still would have given Ryder a couple more rounds than the judges did. And it reminded me of Joe Frazier's third fight with Ali, where Frazier was doing well for a long time. And then the fact that, Frazier was blind in one eye and diabetic didn't help him, but he was brave and he stood in there. And you have to give credit to both Matthew and Buster for doing this in their fight, because this was a war of attrition. There was very little feeling out in this fight. Both men, when the fight started, just, there was maybe a 15 to 30 second period where they were feeling each other out. And Matthew landed a huge right hand to the ribs and left hand to the liver, and then came up with a right hand to the chin. And Drayton fell without bracing himself. Most guys fall and their hands go back. He didn't. He just fell straight like he'd been dropped out of a window. And it looked like he'd been shot. And I didn't think he was going to get up. No one thought he was going to get up. And he really hit the canvas hard. And the referee's counting. And Drayton was smart enough to get to one knee, and take a count. And then he gets up around 9 and he finishes the round. And when I spoke to Matthew about it a while later, I said, that I didn't think he was going to get up. And he said, well, you know what? Me too. And they became close friends. He said, I always kid Buster You know what, Buster? It could have been a great night. Could have been the best night of my life. You could have let me win in a 1 round knockout. Instead, you had to get your sorry butt off the canvas and then fight your heart out for 14 more rounds, making me really work for it. And he did. Drake wasn't going to give the title up. That defined him. That's what he had. And he's a stablemate of Robert Bam Bam Hines, who I'm also friends with. And Hines was the one eventually who beat Matthew, who wasn't in the best of shape for the title. But that's years later. So Drayton gets up, and there's a collective gasp in the Montreal Forum. People couldn't believe this. How can he get up? I mean, he got hit as clean a right hand and as anyone could get hit. And Matthew had his full leverage and balance on it. And even Jim Lampley, who's doing the play-by-play for ABC, said, wow, this kid can bang. He knows his stuff. And the minute Drayton hit the canvas, Matthew turned and ran to the corner. He knew what to do. He was well trained. His father, Dave Hilton, took Matthew and his brother Davey down to see my surrogate father, Angelo Dundee, at the Fifth Street Gym in Florida, and to see what he could do for them. And Angelo watched him work out for an hour and spar. And when he did, he just said, listen, I can't add anything to them. They're already world class. And that's why when he was interviewed, Angelo said, I think it was to Ring Magazine, that the best middleweight or junior middleweight in the world is Davey Hilton Jr. of Montreal. No one's going to beat him. And of course, Davey went on to beat Dingen Thobela to win the, super middleweight world title. So the arena was electric, and everyone was excited because this would be an historic moment. The last world champion from Canada was flyweight Jackie Kalura, and in the 30s, and so, or late 30s, early 40s, and we all wanted Matthew to win, and people were going crazy in the audience, and the fight starts. And he came out, and as I said, he dropped Drayton. Drayton got up, and then Matthew got a bit sloppy, but he went after him. And I cannot stress enough those hard punches to the body that you could hear from all over the arena. It just it's hard to explain like that when that hand hit his body and the sound it would make and that thumping sound. It would be something like putting a sledgehammer on a rock. It just echoed throughout the forum. And I don't know how Drayton, I don't know how he took it. I mean, he suffered something like 3 broken ribs during the fight. And Matthew didn't back off. Matthew was a vicious body puncher. Matthew got him in close and just pounded his body. And his father kept saying, listen, he's older than you. He's tiring. Just beat his body. Kill the body and the head will die. And for most of that fight, Matthew just pounded him and pounded that body. And you'd sit there and you'd think, how is he taking that? No one can take a body shot like that and still survive. But Drayton fought back, and Drayton was a good fighter. He was accurate. And he hit Matthew many shots, and Matthew took them well. He didn't flinch. He just kept coming forward. I think there was a time where Matthew missed a shot and then went down. Drayton did nail him at times, but Matthew took it, smiled, came back, and would just throw flurries of punches. And how on earth, I scrapbook. Yes, everything's fine with me. I have pinched nerves in my arms, but other than that, I'm fine. And I hope all's well with you too. Matthew gave Buster Drayton hell. And of course, this was a showcase fight for ABC because ABC thought here's an upcoming champion. And you're at the bout. Okay, Matthew Hilton. And so was I. I can't believe that Drayton got up. Can you believe Drayton got up from that knockdown? I mean, the way Drayton fell, he fell like a tree that had been cut. And I just don't know how he took that beating for 15 rounds. First round ends and everyone's buzzing because they can't believe Drayton got out of it. How did Drayton get out of it? And the second round comes, and it's we didn't know his ribs were broken, but we knew, he'd taken a ferocious beating. And in the second round, Matthew comes out, and he's doing what he should be doing. He's going all out, because when you knock a guy down like that and you hurt him, you don't want to let him get back in the fight. You want to jump on him right away and just get rid of him. And that's what Matthew tried to do. And in the second round, he comes out and he's throwing those huge shots to the body. And then he's bringing these wide shots upstairs. And Drayton's rolling and blocking and slipping a lot of the punches and ducking some of them. But the ones that land, I mean, they're turning Drayton's head around. And you're just thinking, how on earth is he taking this? But Drayton had good balance. And, Matthew was a clubbing puncher. So he could hit you with a good shot and take you out. When Matthew fought Wilfredo Benitez, and yes, you're right, Scrapbook, Drayton had tremendous will. I mean, he had an iron will. He had a will of steel. He just refused to give up that title. He worked so hard to get it. When he took out Wilfredo Benitez, Matthew had him on the ropes, knocked him into the ropes, threw a right hand, and it missed. And when I asked him after what would have happened if you landed that, he said, I would have killed him. It would have broken his neck, and they would have banned boxing in Quebec forever. So he said, I'm glad I missed it. Drayton deserves all the credit in the world. He could have stayed down in the first round. And so what's the point? My ribs are broken. He hit me a good shot. But he got up, and that's, as I've said several times, and second round, he's doing his best to fight back. And third round, he's fighting his way back into the fight. In the fourth round, Matthew's winning these rounds. Matthew's out punching him, and Matthew's got, more stamina. He's a lot younger, and he's frisky. This is fun for him. He's got this target in front of him, and Drayton's not making any attempt to move to the side or to circle Matthew or to keep turning him. He's standing in front of him. His attitude is, if this is how you want to fight, this is how I'll fight. And Drayton also had a bit of that sparring partner mentality, because when he sparred with a Hagler didn't want you running around, making you chase him. That annoyed him. Hagler wanted you to fight his fight, so you had to stand in front of Hagler and fend off his blows and trade with him. And to be able to do that for as long as Drayton did, I mean, that you learn your craft, because if you don't, you get hurt. And so that was the mentality that Drayton brought into the ring, that sparring partner mentality where, you survive. Whatever you do, this is your living, you've got to survive. So if you break a finger, you break your hand, you break a rib, your nose is broken, like last night with John Ryder versus Canelo, this is your job. There's no quitting. You can't go out and it's not like a baseball player where I have a hangnail, so I'm going on the injured reserve list. You got to fight. And he did. Drayton, you had to admire the fact that he's standing in there with this young buck who's got phenomenal power and a tremendous reputation, and brings these huge shots. And you have to understand, when Matthew's landing these shots in the second, third, and fourth round, they're echoing all throughout the forum. They're resounding shots, huge booms. And it's just continual. It's like when you're watching a war on television or movie and you hear these bombs dropping. This was continually pounding and pounding and pounding his body. And Drayton's got his hands up like this to protect his head so he doesn't get dropped again. And he's trying to grab onto Matthew. Matthew's getting under. Matthew was 5'8", 5'9". Drayton was 5'11", I think, 5'10". And Matthew's getting under his arms and digging those left hooks into his body and right hooks into his spleen. And he's taking a savage beating. And just on the body beating alone, I thought Drayton can't, third, fourth round, I thought he can't take much more of this. This won't go more than 2 or 3 more rounds because, those liver shots are breaking him down, and he's not going to be able to do it. But his balance was so good, Drayton, and he was catching some of the shots or deflecting some on his arms, but huge welts and bruises started developing on his arms. And yes, you're right. The I agree with you. Scrapbook just brought up a thank you. I can't thank you enough. Scrapbook brought up a magnificent point. Uh, the Benitez bout with Matthew Hilton, that really took it. Wouldn't you agree, Scrapbook? That took it all out of Benitez. That was his last stand. He was never the same in or out of the ring after that. Matthew got on him in the beginning. Benitez was taller. He'd come up to 154. He was known as the radar. And Matthew, his father said, listen, he's faster hands, faster legs. And Matthew just got him against the ropes and just left his head alone and just pounded his body repeatedly until he broke him down and then went to the head and knocked him out. And as Scrapbook so accurately, and thank you for pointing this out, Benitez was never the same person after that, not only physically, but emotionally and mentally. That was the beginning of his downfall. He sort of drifted around, ended up living in a gym in Winnipeg until friends of his rescued him. Now he's under 100 pounds. And thank God the Iceman, John Scully, who I adore, is helping him out and giving him money. And it's not like John's rich, but he's getting donations from people and giving what money he has to help out, Benitez. So it's yeah, that was a brutal fight, but that was one of the fights that built Matthew up, that got people talking all over the world, and in the world of boxing, and literally all over the world. And people in Canada got excited. They go, "Have you seen Matthew Hilton? This guy punches like Jack Dempsey. This guy's gonna kill everybody. He's gonna destroy everybody." So when he fought Drayton, and Scrapbook was there at Montreal Forum, right? Scrapbook, you could feel the excitement. People are going, "This is going to be the greatest day in Canadian sports, next to the 72 series of the hockey series of the Russians, because we're going to get a world champion today, because you can't beat Matthew Hilton. If Drayton didn't bring the American 7th Army with him, then Drayton doesn't have a chance, because he's not going to hurt Matthew. Matthew's going to stand in there and just pound him." And he did. Third round, hearing those booming shots echo throughout the forum. And people are thinking, well, maybe it's a microphone from the ring and then it echoes the same thing around the ring. And people are saying, no, you could hear those shots. I mean, people way up in the rafters like, "Oh my God, I can't believe he's taken that." And I had a friend who was there with his wife, and he kept saying to me, "How is he taking this beating? This isn't human. No one could take a beating like this." And Matthew's just wearing him down. Matthew is huge shoulders and big hands, and he's leaning in. He's got his head on Drayton's chest. He's ignoring Drayton's head, and he's just pounding the body. And he's not just trying to punch the body. He wants to punch through the body. And he's burying his left hand into Drayton's liver, like almost up to his elbow, and he's hitting him in the right side of his body too. And he's pounding with those, 1, 2, 3 right hands in a row, and then a left hook to the liver, another left hook to the liver, right hand to the chin, left hook to the liver, left hook to the head. And when Drayton's covering up, Matthew takes what he gets. He tried a couple times to punch around the arms, but his father said, forget it, beat his arms, like Marciano used to do. And he's pounding Drayton's arms, which, as the rounds go on, Drayton's arms get heavier and heavier, and it's hard to keep them up, and as the fight progressed, Drayton's sort of starting to drop his arms a bit and moving his head more, because, Matthew's just pounding the hell out of his arms, which are covered in welts. And Drayton at the same time isn't just being a punching bag. He's fighting back. He's catching Matthew with a lot of good shots. Matthew was getting hit with, 2, 3, 4 punch combinations, but Matthew would just smile. He loved a good fight. He loved the competition, and he would come back. Matthew, was able to elude a lot of shots, but he was still coming back. He was still going forward and making more than making a fight. I mean, he was dominating the fight. And it's interesting in between rounds, because you have Matthew's father, David, who's just telling him, Dave Hilton, who was the featherweight champion of Canada, and had 5 sons who were great boxers. The youngest Stewart, who they said was the best, passed away in a motorcycle accident. And as an amateur in Canada, most pros in the States looked at him, Stewart, and thought, this guy's a surefire world champion. I think he would have been, if not for that tragedy. But Matthew, father's saying, listen, stick to the game plan. Don't go headhunting. And even in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, as the fight's progressing, he's saying, don't go out there trying to look to take him out with one shot. Break him down. You're doing the right thing. Kill that body. And that's because Dave Hilton, Mr. Hilton's, I always call him Mr. Hilton. He says to me, you can call me Dave. And I don't have the right to call you Dave. But his heroes were Joe Louis and Jack Dempsey. And he knew they weren't just his heroes. He was friends with them. So he loved the way Louis fought and the way Louis would set his punches up and the way Dempsey would work the body. And he taught all this. And he had his sons watch these films. And he would say to them, this is the correct way to do it. This is how you do it. Unless you're like Joe Louis and you have one punch devastating power where you could turn a man's, lights out, and then with one shot, you work the body. That's how you do it. And that's what Dempsey did. Dempsey would get in there, lean into his opponents, break their ribs, pound their body till they were in agonizing pain. Then they bring their arms down to protect the body, and then that's when he'd go for the head. And that's what Matthew was doing. He had a game plan, and unlike most fighters, he stuck to it. He knew what he was doing. So I look at a lot of the Charlos today. I don't think they would have had a chance against Matthew. They never would have been hit by someone of that kind of power. I think Tim Tszyu would have been a good fight, but once again, at 154, never been hit the way Matthew Hilton could punch. Same with Canelo. Everyone talks about Canelo. Canelo was faster than Matthew, but Matthew had that one punch power. And I think I just don't see Canelo at junior middle, the Charlos, anyone beating Matthew Hilton in his prime, or Davey Hilton in his prime at 168. But at 154, Matthew was unbeatable. And as boxing experts said throughout the world, the only person who could beat Matthew Hilton was Matthew Hilton. And that was it, just by not taking care of himself and not training as hard as he should have and partying too much. And, I love Matthew. He's a dear friend. And when I got divorced, he was the first person to call me at home to see how I was doing. He's a wonderful person. He's very lovable and very personable. He's a great, fantastic father and a wonderful husband. And, you can talk to him about boxing. When I met him the first couple of times, I was nervous because he was the world champ and a star, but he put me at ease. His skill level was incredible, and I wish more people in Canada would know about him. He was the first Canadian universally recognized world champion since the days of Jackie Calera. And so you're looking at, 40 years later, 46, 47 years after Calera. So Hilton was able to stand his track against Drayton. He didn't deviate from it. Drayton had his moments where he would occasionally move and he'd catch Matthew of 2 or 3 shots, hit him with a body shot. But Matthew's body was like Superman's. It was made of steel. You're not going to hurt him to the body. And he'd catch Matthew with some headshots too. And he could put his combinations together, Drayton. But Matthew, as I said, would always smile and come back and keep pushing Drayton back and with his shoulders and with his body shots. And he forced Drayton to cover up a lot during the fight. You're getting into the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th round, and Matthew's still pounding him. And Drayton's taking, deep breaths, and he's doing his best to hang on. He's trying to catch this young colt and quarter him, and just hold his arms. But Matthew was so strong. He could just flex the arms, and there was nothing Drayton could do about it. And, come the 10th and 11th round, 12th round, Matthew was starting to get a bit tired, and he was starting to slip a bit. And when I literally slip, and he would be missing of punches, and the more tired he got, the wider and sloppier his punches became. But when he got back to the corner, his father said, listen, smarten up. This is the time you've been waiting. he won by a wide margin, but he said, don't do that. Shorten your shots up. When you widen your shots, when you wing your shots, you're leaving yourself open to get countered. Don't do that. Don't let him back into this fight. Keep your hands up by your head and throw with your shoulder and and move at the hips. Shoulder snap and leverage. Drive off your back foot. Don't stand there and wing arm punches. That gives him a chance to counter, and you don't want to do that. And so Matthews, he got back into it. It was just fatigue that was making him do that. And he just started to whack him and whack him and whack him more. And there were times where, you could see Drayton take a deep breath. You could see Matthew take a deep breath. These guys were two guys that were really, really, really winded. But it was an exciting fight. But I think a scrapbook would agree, everyone there wanted to see Matthew knock him out. We all thought, well, the knockout will come because that's what Matthew Hilton does. He breaks people down, he knocks them out. And no man can take a beating like the beating Hilton dished out to Buster Drayton for a full 15 rounds. That's just not physically possible. But you got to give Drayton credit. I mean, he really deserves credit. He came in as a champion. He was well trained. He was in shape. There wasn't even a tenth of an ounce of fat on him. He knew his trade well. He knew what he was getting into. He was going into the firing den there, and he knew he had a young lion in front of him who was looking to demolish him. And he took everything Matthew had. He took a ferocious beating after and was urinating blood for a long time. He got pounded in the liver and in the spleen. He had broken ribs. I think he had a busted nose, and he still, bit down on his mouthpiece, and he still kept going forward. He still kept moving forward, trying to move. He wasn't strong enough to move Matthew back, but he still kept throwing punches. And you have to wonder about someone's will to win. He was the champion. And so even though he's losing and his body is in agony and he's out of breath and his arms are heavy and hurt, he's still trying to lean forward on Matthew and throw shots to Matthew's body, which was like watching raindrops bounce off a tank. And he would bring quick shots up to Matthew's chin, but they didn't have enough on it to make Matthew respect his power. So Matthew just kept coming and coming. And it was sort of like watching a tidal wave, this inexorable force that you just couldn't stop. You couldn't build a wall high enough or strong enough or thick enough to prevent Matthew Hilton from coming forward. He just kept marching forward and marching Buster all over the ring and doing what he wanted to do with him while wearing him out with these phenomenal body shots. And you're watching this and you're thinking, there's really no one out there in this division who's going to beat Matthew, except Matthew. And he held the title for a while. I mean, I'll never forget when the fight was over, and the announcer said, Nouveau Champion from Rigaud, Quebec, Canada, the IBF champion, super or junior middleweight champion of the world, Matthew Hilton. And everyone jumped up and everyone was hugging each other and they were so happy for Matthew. And at that point in time in 1987 in June, we thought, well, he's in his 20s. He'll hold the title for 10 years because there's no one out there who's got that kind of ability who can beat him. It just doesn't exist. And unfortunately, I meet with a guy named Jack Halloran after, which went 2 rounds, but Matthew started partying and he didn't take care of himself. And he lost the title to Robert Hines in Vegas. He wasn't in shape. And then he got stopped by one of his closest friends, Doug DeWitt. He fought a couple more times and then he retired. So I don't think what happened to him after he won the title detracts from how great his career was and what its accomplishments were. He's a Hall of Famer. He wasn't prepared for all that fame and money and glory. Very few fighters are. Very few athletes are. But for that moment on that day in 1987 in June, Matthew Hilton was the best that Matthew Hilton was the best junior middleweight on the planet. And as I've said, from 1987 till today, which is 36 years, I still haven't seen a junior middleweight that I would look at and say he could beat Matthew Hilton. And that includes Canelo Alvarez as a junior middle, uh, Charlos, um, Tim Tszyu, anyone else out there. I just don't think that Sebastian Fundora especially because of his height, and he just got knocked out recently. I think Matthew would have just annihilated him. It would have annihilated all of them. I don't think they could have taken that kind of power. And I have to say, he's one of the greatest fighters our country or any country's ever produced, from the fabulous fighting Hiltons that produced two undisputed world champions. And I don't think, as I said, there's not been a middleweight since his time that I could look at and say, well, he would have given Matthew a good fight or he would have beaten Matthew. On his best night against Drayton, no one beats Matthew Hilton. Not fighters before him, and certainly no one after him. And I just think you have to give him credit for that. This was a great fight. You can get it on YouTube. It's well worth watching. And Matthew's online if you want to drop him a line. And I hope you enjoyed the show. That's been Ring Talk for today. My name's Lou Eisen, and we'll see you again next week with another great fight. Thank you.